Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Bernard here with Austan Goolsbee, Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. And we are here at Cleveland State University for the Winning the Future Forum on Small Business. The President and his economic team, including Austan, are here meeting with a few hundred small business leaders to hear about their ideas for improving the economy and winning the future. We want to extend that opportunity to everybody online. So we are here taking questions coming in on Whitehouse.gov and Facebook around key issues for small businesses. So today we're going to cover things like entrepreneurship, access to capital, obviously a popular one, workforce development, exports, and clean energy. So if you've got any questions and want to participate in the small business conversation, just go to facebook.com/Whitehouse and send in your questions, and we'll pick them out. Austan, anything you want to say at the start?
Well, look, thanks everybody for taking the time to check in here. We're having a great event so far. The President gave some remarks. They got 5 other cabinet members running sessions with a couple hundred business leaders from the Cleveland area where we are, where they're going through these subjects. And we appreciate the more than 1,500 people who sent in questions and comments over the weekend in the advisors which we asked. So I just really appreciate everybody's effort.
And before we launch into questions, I should explain why we have an empty chair next to Austan. We're expecting the President to come by at 1:10. So if you're thinking of turning off your computer, don't do that. He'll come by and take a few of your questions as well. So why don't we launch in? So we asked small businesses about entrepreneurship. The question we asked them was, when you first had a new idea for a business, how did you convert that idea into a growing business? We really wanted to hear from people. So some things that we heard, let me ask you this one. From Reshma in Vancouver, Washington, asks, I'm currently working on 2 projects, one for profit and one non-for-profit. It was not hard for me to get the online part up and running, as I have experience in that area, but to get the licenses, real estate, regulations, and other legal things starting, from whether or not to get an S-Corp or LLC, and all those hassles are just a waste of time. So I understand them, and it's not hard once you understand them, but is all of this hassle really worth the time?
Look, this is a great question, and it's not just in Washington where this business is, where this is an issue. The important thing to remember is that normally when you come out of recession, small business, one of the major engines of recovery. This was a very difficult downturn on small business, and we're still trying to make that happen and get small business fully recovered. To do that, we're going to have to address, as the President has outlined in his Startup America initiative, reducing regulatory burdens and making it easier for small business to operate in the business environment. The second piece of Startup America is cutting taxes, which the President has now cut 17 different times for small business, and several of those are tax simplification for small business, so you don't have to fill out as many forms, so you don't have to keep track of every single cell phone call you make and allocate which ones were for business and which ones were not. And the third is trying to get business mentors and the public sector working with the private sector to help people to get past exactly these kind of issues. I think it's a key question.
Makes sense. I've got one from, still on the subject of entrepreneurship. Michael Copen from Hayes, Virginia sent this in a couple days ago. Nearly 20 years ago, it's a great story. He sat with a colleague at his kitchen table assessing our professional strengths and weaknesses. We knew what we wanted to do, but not how we would get there in terms of advertising, performance, and especially managing our cash flow. At one point, they were nearly $200,000 in the red, but we kept their dream alive through credit offered to us by credit card companies and a few banks. Today, they're successful, earning an acceptable wage, but he's really nervous that entrepreneurs today don't have the same financial backing. He thinks that a mentor-protege concept similar to the SBIR program may help small businesses. What do you think?
Well, look, you said it was Michael. What Michael's saying here is exactly right. And in his own story, you've got sort of 3 key components that you see all the time. One, that good ideas of successful businesses often start in the kitchen, in the garage, in very modest circumstances at the beginning, and they require access to capital and lending to be able to get out of that idea / very beginning startup phase into the growth phase. Now, the president's put a big focus on trying to help small businesses get access to capital, especially in an environment where community banks have been really hard hit by the financial crisis. So that's why he passed the Small Business Jobs and Lending Bill. And then the last thing that Michael brought up there was this mentor-protege framework, which is, as I mentioned, for Startup America, one of the key components. And Steve Case, the founder of America Online, is heading up the Startup America Foundation, which is trying to bring this public-private partnership model to finding these business mentors. You know, maybe they're retired executives or people that want to give back, that they can help people who are starting up their own companies. I think it's really important, and we've seen success with that in the Small Business Administration in the past. They've also got the Department of Veterans Affairs, for example, is trying to foster these incubators to give advice to veterans who want to start their own businesses, of which there are literally thousands around the country trying to do that.
Makes sense. I want to jump to actually access to capital, because Sandy Hood on Facebook, Sandy, we found your comment, just had a question. So she says, let's support and give small local banks and credit unions the help they need. They will help local small businesses. What do you have to say about
Well, look,
local banks?
that is the idea. What Sandy's discussing there of, look, why don't we help the local banks and credit unions in order to help small business? That is the idea of the Small Business Lending Fund that the president got signed into law. It's exactly that we would give extra capital to community banks and local banks if they will increase the lending that they do to small businesses. I think it's a great idea. The president's totally for that.
On the access to capital part, I heard a lot of comments. So we've started taking comments earlier in the week in a program that we call Advise the Advisor, where we take input directly to White House administration officials like Austan here. Here's an indicative comment from Christine Higgins in Mount Carmel, Illinois. There is no access to capital, all caps. Banks refuse to lend. The city acts like they don't know what you're talking about when you mention TARP money. And the same with the county. So where is the TARP money? Where'd it go? How do I get it?
Well,
I added that
look,
for you.
The Small Business Lending Fund is exactly designed to be about this kind of access to capital, that we give capital to local and community banks if they increase the amount of lending they're doing to small businesses. I would also highlight a couple of other ways that we're helping get capital to entrepreneurs. The first is by cutting their taxes 17 different times, doing things like setting the small business capital gains rate to 0. First, if you start up your own business, the capital gains rate on that would be 0 under the president's, of what the president has done. And the other area that I would highlight is, as part of Startup America, the Small Business Administration is taking some capital and using it as a matching fund, essentially, with private sector money, that if you can raise money in the private sector, there is matching money that could come from the Small Business Administration. That has proven a better way to do it than having the government just decide who ought to get the money, obviously, yep, because it has that extra discipline on it.
Elle Smallwood from Bridgeport, Connecticut has an idea about, maybe one of the answers here is to start a micro-lending program, less than $15,000 to help people with great ideas but little money to get started. He also thinks that we need to relax credit scores and standards for these people who need a microloan, because they've had financial hardships because of loss of jobs, hospital bills, and other recession-related issues.
Well, look, I'm not a banker. I'm not going to decide who's credit worthy. I will tell you this. The Small Business Administration, under this president, has had a dramatic expansion in their playing a role throughout this crisis of trying to get capital to small business people, including micro lending, including money for working capital, where a lot of small businesses have been squeezed by, if they're the supplier to a bigger business, the bigger businesses have squeezed them on working capital or slowed down the payments that they receive. And I would refer EL
Yep.
to SBA, where we've got a number of innovative programs that are directly geared toward exactly that, as well as to Startup America.
Let's switch gears for
Okay.
fun to workforce development. So we posed a question: how can government and business work together to better prepare the next generation workforce for jobs of the future? An interesting point came in from Leonard and Eileen. I'm gonna butcher your name. I apologize. Cacciasio is what I'm gonna go with. Staten Island, New York. Talked about two-year colleges and community colleges. The return of the original mission of the two-year associate degree that focuses on job development is very important. It seems that there's been a movement towards viewing the first 2 years of an associate degree as the first 2 years of a traditional four-year college degree. What that does is transform the faculty in a research-based faculty that's mostly committed to four-year and graduate students. And that faculty may well shape the future of our industries, but usually they are not involved in training the workforce at any given moment. In contrast, the two-year college with a focus on workforce development can hire faculty committed to training students as workforce ready for the present and prepared to evolve as needs develop.
Well, I'd say this, and I bet it's Chiacchio.
Thank
or
you.
Chiacchio.
I'm sorry.
But the issue that they are raising about the diversity of workforce training and the different types of educational and training institutions we have is super important. In the same way, nobody should be saying automatically four-year colleges are superior to community colleges or something like that. We shouldn't do the opposite either. We have the strongest higher education system in the world. Community colleges have been one of the unsung heroes of our educational system. They've trained millions of students to be ready to get into the workforce, and we've got to continue that. The president has identified the training of our workforce, and especially through community colleges and two-year institutions, as one of the most fundamental investments that we've got to make in this country so that 5 and 10 years down the road, we are able to compete against the workers in other countries. That's the basis for our kids and ourselves to have the kind of careers that we're going to need to have that pay good wages. I would highlight things like the Skills for America's Future, which is a public-private partnership that was pushed by the president. You got a number of large and small employers around the country who stepped forward and they said, let's form a nonprofit in which we do the following. Company A wants to hire trained workers, and they're willing to put up their own private money to get a community college to set up a program to train the workers. The workers, potential workers who want to be students, they want to enter a program that will get them a job at the end of it, and the community college wants to create a program that will allow them to work in that space. So it was a natural area to bring together employers, community colleges, and students to develop these programs where they can hire people as soon as they're ready, and things like that, as well as funding our community colleges around the country, are key investments that we simply have to make if we're going to win the future. See, I got that, win the future.
Thank you.
If you didn't hear it, you can read it on the thing behind me.
Along the lines of taking courses, Michael French from Indianapolis notes that workers who need new skills and training are often unable to pay for the courses, sometimes even at community colleges. They need more grants and scholarships rather than loans.
Look, the issue of the financing of education is critically important, especially for low-income, middle-income families who've just gone through the worst downturn since 1929. I mean, that is why in the president's budget, He's got a firm commitment to helping, A, get college costs down, but B, help keep it affordable on financial aid. It's why we're pushing ahead with Skills for America's Future, which is a program, which is a partnership of the public sector with the private sector, which has very little explicit budgetary cost to the government, but where the companies themselves who want these workers with skills are willing to pay for a significant share of the cost of getting this training. I think if we're not investing in our people, what are we doing? I mean, there's not anything more important than that.
A lot of comments came in about the baby boomer generation as a large part of the workforce. So Jay Hill in Renton, Washington notes that we've got a large workforce that is quickly approaching quote unquote retirement age. Most of us want to still be useful, productive members of society. It's actually healthier to stay active and involved rather than become a burden. How do we develop ways to make this generation become better teachers for the younger generation?
Well, that probably means teachers in the broadest sense, unless they really truly mean teachers, and that'd be okay too. The president's got a major initiative to we're going to have a lot of the teachers retiring over the next 10 to 20 years, and so he has called for increasing the number of teachers in science and math by more than 100,000. So one thing you can do is become a teacher. More broadly, to be a teacher of the young or mentor to whether it's business people or young people in general, I think it's very important that we do that and that we acknowledge and recognize that people over age 50 are major high producers. They're very productive in the data. They're important producers for the American economy. It's an important resource, and we should definitely not be neglecting that. Now, it'd be presumptuous of me to tell anybody you should, or well, here's what age you should retire at. That's everybody's got to figure that out for themselves. But their contribution to the country is quite important.
We got an idea that just came in from Carl Senna on Facebook. I don't know if this idea has ever crossed your desk. Why no government investment in inventors clubs? There's small investment, big results, new industries.
In investor clubs or
inventor clubs? Did I say
inventor
investor?
Clubs?
Sorry.
Inventor clubs.
Inventor clubs.
That sounds like a good club. Look, there's always a question of what is the appropriate role of government. But if there are clubs, gatherings, two inventors meeting in their garage in Silicon Valley where they're coming up with ideas that could be major companies that could, as I've said before, transform from an idea in the garage to companies that employ 50, 100,000 workers in America. The government wants to be about facilitating the growth of companies like that. And I think with Startup America, it might actually be a fairly interesting idea to hook them up with some inventor clubs. So thank you for that suggestion.
Do you think the same goes for universities? We've got a comment from Larry Lang in Sylacauga, Alabama, suggesting government universities partnering to offer business incubators.
Same thing. Yes, for sure. You've seen around the country and in some very public examples the business incubator function of universities, the commercialization of research from universities, turning that into businesses that can grow and employ people in the country has been one of the great engines of invention and growth over U.S. history. So the way the government has tried to facilitate that are taking policy steps to facilitate the commercialization of the research at universities and government labs, maintaining the research funding for advanced science, R&D, health science, the National Institute of Health and things like that, and then wherever possible, through things like Startup America or Small Business Administration, enable the access to capital for people around universities or within universities that are starting up companies.
Makes sense. How about we switch gears to exports? So the question we posed out to everybody online was, promoting U.S. exports is an effective way to grow businesses and create jobs. What obstacles does your business face in exporting goods and services to foreign markets? actually had an easy, well, a straightforward obstacle from Stephen Martinez in Houston. He says shipping costs can be prohibitive to creating profits. If there was a rebate system for reaching certain export goals, perhaps we could ship more overseas.
It's an interesting idea, the shipping cost question. I haven't seen any, and I will look into the issue. I haven't seen much directly on rebates for shipping costs, but I have seen the Commerce Department, and Secretary Locke is here at the event today, doing a breakout session on exports. It turns out for most companies, and especially for small businesses, if they export to only one country. And so they have tried to partner with shippers like FedEx and UPS to help these companies, small startups and small businesses, just find customers outside the U.S. So if they're in one country, they could match up and say, well, look, a lot of people in your line of work are shipping to the following kinds of people. It's almost like a Rolodex or directory of where the customers are. And so I think looking at the shippers more broadly than just what's the price they charge of the shipping is probably worthwhile.
Got a question about taxes. Taxing production does not make sense, per Jer Clifton in Avondale Estates, Georgia. Why do we penalize those who generate wealth, especially when they are small businesses? Instead, we should make America a place where it's cheap to produce and then export. All those production jobs would stimulate the economy for sure, even if we do not get to tax the products at the point of consumption.
Well, I think I agree in spirit with what Jer is saying, but I don't think that it's true that that the Obama administration or the U.S. in general is about trying to tax production here in the U.S., especially small businesses. As I say, the president's cut taxes for small businesses 17 different times, including setting the capital gains rate to zero, giving health care credits to small businesses, and a series of other domestic production incentives to try to encourage people to invest in this country. And for small businesses, you can write off several $100,000 for tax purposes of capital equipment that you buy, exactly to try to encourage you to produce here. So I think Jer is on the right path, but I disagree a little with the premise.
Just want to comment to Gerard Peregrine, who just submitted something on Facebook, noted, let's encourage SCORE executives and SBA specialists to provide hands-on services rather than startup advice. Just wanted to tell you that I'll pass that on to the SBA for you. Okay. And for folks who might just be joining online, go ahead and submit your questions on on Facebook.com Whitehouse. We're taking questions live right now for Austan. Let's jump off of exports for a little bit.
Okay.
How about clean energy? Jerry Crabtree from Iowa wants to know, this is a field looking to the future, but will it be enough in place of lost jobs?
The focus on clean energy, he's saying?
Clean energy.
Well, look, I certainly hope so, and part of that depends on policy, and part of that depends on how much innovation we get in that space. It's obviously been a key priority for the president and the administration that we can get a double win of converting ourselves to a cleaner energy economy, which will create jobs and can be an industry of the future across the skill spectrum, I might add. So it's not just PhD scientists or something. There's a whole range of the kinds of cleaner energy jobs that we can focus on, while at the same time reducing our dependence on foreign oil, reducing our consumption to reduce our carbon pollution or other kinds of air pollution. So I think that's been a big focus. But we've got to have innovation in that area if it's going to generate the kind of new companies and new jobs enough to make up for what's been lost, of course.
What do you think about a program for the profits and savings from clean energy could be made available to business owners who pledge to invest in those funds back into their business to hire more workers? That's from Michael French in Indianapolis.
Well, I think, Michael, I mean, it's an interesting idea. We'd have to think through exactly, and maybe Michael's got some more details of what it would be, but we need to think through the mechanics of that. In general, take an initiative like retrofitting buildings, okay, where again you can get in a double win, where you can save the business or the residents hundreds of dollars a month, thousands of dollars a year by putting in insulation, new windows, more efficient appliances, can put out of work construction workers back to work doing it. And the president has been fairly active at trying to encourage and incentivize that kind of behavior. Seems like for energy saving appliances, machinery, boilers, and other things, they would qualify under what Michael's talking about there. And I would describe part of the policies we've done as being in the spirit of what Michael's saying, of trying to give incentives so businesses can do something where they're going to save money if they're plowing, so they will have the money to plow back in their own companies.
We've got, I want to skip back to access to capital because we've got a lot of points coming in. Warren Nagler writes, private equity and venture capital need to be efficiently partnered with good business ideas that need to be made into winning businesses with sustainable competitive advantage. His private equity firm does that. How can the government facilitate this process?
Well, for the most part, that's a private sector activity. The people allocating the capital and what are good business ideas is best done in the private sector. And I think everybody acknowledges that and recognizes that. What you've seen with the Startup America program, as an example, is Small Business Administration using a kind of a matching function rather than an explicitly them being the ones to decide what will be successful business ideas. That if you can attract significant private either lending or venture capital or private equity funding, that you could get some match from SBA. That strikes me as a viable way to do it. The second way I think the government can facilitate it is by continuing the funding of research and development, so we are generating the new ideas, and commercialization of university and national lab research, which historically have led to some of the biggest companies in the United States employing the most people. They started in somebody's garage, and so we got to keep those ideas getting generated. But those strike me as two important ways.
Stephanie Myers wanted a quick clarification. Did you really mean to say that you're only interested in ideas that can create 50,000 jobs, or did I misunderstand the earlier comment?
Did I say that? I don't think I said that. What I said is we want to generate jobs. We want, I think it was in the question about inventor clubs. And I said, look, inventor clubs may sound like a ragtag, 5 kids in the garage, but some of our biggest companies that employ 50,000 people started like that. So certainly I want more of those, but I'm not meaning to say that only 50,000 person companies matter. Absolutely the opposite. I mean, the data show, and the reason the president's here in Cleveland for this small business event with 6 members of the cabinet is small businesses are 2/3 of the net new job creation that we've had in recent decades. And so we've got to have an emphasis on the whole ecology of the economy across the full-size distribution.
As an internet event, I have to ask this one, from Larry Ward in Seattle. He's noting that an obstacle for small business is unfair competition with internet sales. You sell golf equipment and a consumer can buy it on the internet and not have to pay sales tax. It's an unfair advantage for internet sales.
Well, much of that, as you know, on sales tax is state law, so it's not federal law.
Hello.
I thought I'd join you
President.
here. I'm sorry, did I interrupt an answer?
Nope. Thanks for joining.
You bet.
Okay.
All right.
The President of the United States is here. Why don't you tell us why you're here?
Well, Cleveland, I think, is a great example of cities all across the country, but especially in the Midwest, who are starting to reinvent themselves. These are typically manufacturing cities. They were built on the auto industry, on heavy manufacturing, steel, And as manufacturing has become much more productive, fewer workers are in manufacturing, even though manufacturing continues to contribute a lot to the economy. And so these regions are having to think, what's going to be the businesses of the future that end up employing more people and providing more opportunity. And small businesses are going to be the ones that I think are going to be making the biggest impact on regions like this one. A lot of risk takers, a lot of entrepreneurs here. What we wanted to do was make sure that we listen to small businesses, hear from them, find out what kinds of barriers they're meeting, whether it's capital or finding the right workforce, or how do they partner with larger companies. And so far, we've already gotten some terrific ideas.
He's better at this than we are. Now, we got some questions for you from Whitehouse.gov that we were going to shoot to you. James Pepitone in Addison, Texas. With the virtual death of local banking, it's next to impossible today to get bank loans for anything other than fixed assets. For working capital, speculative funding, or others, entrepreneurs must look to saved capital, family, friends, or even a first customer. Traditional financing sources only help the more traditional forms of business. Innovators must look elsewhere. There were a lot in this spirit, and we were wondering what your view is.
Well, one of the things we hear most frequently from small businesses is the problem of startup capital. Obviously, a lot of small businesses do get started with the entrepreneur's savings, family loans, credit cards. But over the last 2 years, it's been especially tough for small businesses because of the credit crunch, both in the banking industry, as well as the fact that folks don't have home equity loans that they could use potentially to start a business. Their credit cards might have been maxed out. And so what we did over the last 2 years was try to make sure that the Small Business Administration, the SBA, filled some of this hole. We increased the guarantees that SBAs would provide to banks if they loaned if they made a loan to a small business. We eliminated some of the fees that might be required. And as a consequence, volume from the Small Business Administration went up substantially. The other thing that we did was we increased the limits on the loans that might be provided through the SBA. So the SBA has done a lot of good work. The Treasury Department has also tried to make sure that they set up funds that would help to facilitate lending to small businesses. That's especially important in part because small businesses a lot of times have trouble getting loans when their collateral has gone down. The value of their holdings have gone down, and typically that's been real estate for a lot of small businesses. So we've got a range of products that through the SBA, through Treasury, are providing loans to small businesses, helping encourage small banks to get back into the business of lending again. But we heard some good ideas here today about, for example, providing tax credits for angel investors. That right now there have been some discussions in Congress about setting up some additional legislation that could help small businesses, and we're going to see if we can implement.
We had a lot of questions come in about, or comments and thoughts about the preparing the next generation workforce. Roy Paulson in Temecula, California, noted, the economy develops in pockets and clusters. Why don't we match this with our workforce development for the best results? We all know that people have many different jobs over their lifetime, and we need to retrain where and when it's needed. Keep it simple, apply it quickly, keep it local. The local aspect allows easy access for people that need the training, and it's tailored to the local environment and conditions.
Well, the answer is in the question. I think that question is spot on. What you find as you travel around the country is that there's certain regions that are starting to gain expertise in biotech, or they're starting to gain expertise in advanced battery manufacturing, or they're starting to gain expertise in a particular industry, which requires a particular skill set. And if we can get businesses to partner with local community colleges or local universities and have them help to design the training process for the jobs that already exist, it's a win-win. For the businesses, it means that all their workforce training costs are absorbed somewhere else, which is obviously good for their bottom line. For the students, what it means is that if you actually go through this program, you know that there's going to be a job at the end of the day because the employers have actually helped to design the program. And so Skills for America's Future is a program that we've been trying to implement that gets those partnerships between businesses and colleges and universities. The local community colleges is a particular asset that has been underutilized over the last several years that we want to really ramp up. The Department of Labor is also working with state and local governments so that they can design and tailor their own particular approach to training. But the key here is to recognize that for the vast majority of folks out there, you're not going to have one job or two jobs during the course of your career. You're probably going to have 6 or 7 different jobs. And even mid-career, you may have to start retraining. And what we want to make sure of is, A, that there's financing out there for you to retrain, which is why we increased access to student loans, eliminating some of the unwarranted subsidies that went to banks so that we could expand the Pell Grant program, make sure that starting in 2014, if you take out student loans, that in repaying them, you'll never have to pay more than 10% of your income. So we've expanded access to universities and colleges. But we also want to make sure that you're being trained for the right stuff. And that's particularly true for your second career. For older students, they've got a family, they may be working. They can't afford to go to school, take out loans, and then it turns out that what they were getting trained for didn't provide an immediate job opportunity.
Helpful. I don't know how your time is. Do you have time for
He's the
another
president
thought?
of the United States.
I think you've got to go.
You got one online?
I'll take one more question if you got it.
Oh, it's really putting me on the spot. Let's see what's just come in.
Some of them we have to clean
some.
up.
Yeah, you know, we have a lot of comments about a lot of things coming in.
Generally speaking, though, what I'll do is just talk about what I've heard in some of these forums.
Great.
Yeah.
In addition to financing, I think the other thing that people really wanted to find out is how can they get mentored and partner
Yeah.
with some larger businesses. And we're very lucky. We've got Steve Case here, who obviously used to be with AOL. He's agreed to be the chairman of our sort of umbrella organization that is Startup America, which is going to help to mentor and partner with would-be entrepreneurs, get them with more mature businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, because a lot of times what they need is financing, but sometimes what they need is mentoring, networking. They need to, you know, if you're in the high-tech space, the most important thing for you is to potentially get in front of a Steve Case or a Steve Jobs or a Mark Zuckerberg or others and get a sense of what it is that is happening in your industry, who are the players there. And so that's another opportunity through a public-private partnership. It doesn't cost money, but it can potentially provide opportunities for
And
people.
we did hear from a number of people who they're in a later part of their career, and they said,
Yeah.
look, we still want to be productive. How can we help out? How can we teach the next generation? It seems fits with your theme there.
Absolutely. So,
Yep.
bottom line is that small businesses create 2 out of every 3 jobs in America. We're here in Cleveland to make sure that we're highlighting all the tools that are available right now to increase opportunities for small businesses, tax credits if you're providing health care to your workers, tax credits if you're interested in investing in a small business. Right now you get 0 capital gains on those investments. There are a whole range of tools that we're trying to bring to bear to make sure that we continue to be the most dynamic economy in the world. And I'm sure that Austin and Sarah will be interested in monitoring our website to get even better ideas as time comes up. And let's make sure people know what the website is. It is
Whitehouse.gov.
Whitehouse.gov. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.